Sorry, my finger clicked there. Oh, they clicked again. Sorry. Very attractive. Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah and I love to talk about books. Today is my first video wrapping up what I read in February, and these are all new releases that I think that you should definitely pick up. Before I start though, I would just like to say thank you for the lovely supportive messages I got to my last video. It really means a lot to me that we've all found each other through books, and even though we live on different sides of the earth in some cases, there is that sense of community here on BookTube, and it really meant a lot to hear your kind words. The person who I was talking about in the last video, who was ill with COVID, for anyone who hadn't seen it, they're making really good progress. They seem to be out of the danger zone. It's going to be a long recovery, but we're feeling a lot more hopeful than I was when I made that video last week. So I'm in a lovely headspace to come into a video talking about some really fantastic new releases that I read in February. I've got 3 5 stars, 2 4 stars, and 1 that might be a 3-star, could be more, but I'll explain more about that when I get there. So the first book I want to talk about is When the Music Stops by Jo Heap. This book, wow, this book, guys, this is such a gem of a book, and it's the story of Robert and Ella, whose lives begin on the same street in Glasgow, and which are intertwined throughout the decades through music and loss. It's also structured around the 7 modes of music. So these are the 7 ways around which music has been arranged ever since ancient times. It's not as highbrow as it sounds for those non-musically talented among us, but it gives the book a really nice structure. And it follows Ella from the present day, where she is elderly and has found herself lost in quite a traumatic situation, and looks at 7 pivotal moments of her and Robert's lives throughout the decades, and with a cast of characters who are also central to those moments in time. I felt that this book blends a similar vibe to One Day by David Nichols with The 5 People You Meet in Heaven by Mitch Albom, but with added ghosts and music and a building sense of tension throughout the whole book to create something that's really unique. So it takes us from Glasgow, I think it's during World War II, to the beatnik scene in London in the 60s, from recording studios to a Burns unit, and from a tenement to a luxury cruise liner. This book visits Ella in all the different stages of her life. I feel like Heap's prose is quite simple, but it's still gorgeous. And there's a touch of like whimsy in this book that stops it ever being dark or bleak. And then of course there is the element of music, which is kind of a character in and of itself. And in particular, I really appreciated how the importance of music with those who are suffering from dementia is really at the core of this book. I think it struck a chord with me at that point because I was reading this just as we were about to lose my granddad, and music was a big part of his whole life, but also particularly something that he still had towards the end of it. I just thought this book was really clever. It was sad, but it was warm, and I absolutely loved that element of tension that builds through the book as we were looking at Ella in the present day and the situation which she's found herself in. I just thought this book was really special. I adored it, and I would definitely be looking to read something else that Jo Heap has written. I'm annoyed at myself because unlike a lot of the other titles I'm going to discuss today, this didn't actually come out in March. This came out in October, and it's taken me far too long to get to it because I was blown away by this book. My next 5-star read was also one of the books that kind of got caught in my NetGalley backlog and was also out in October last year, and it's The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi, whose name has been on my radar for a while. I know he's a really good non-fiction writer. This is his first novel and is the first of his books that I've actually read. Over the past few years, I'm coming to know my reading tastes a little bit better, and I've realised that the blend of historical fiction with magical realism is something that I really enjoy. I'm also really interested in Black history, and so when I read the premise of this book, I knew I had to read it. This is the story of Hiram Walker, who is a slave on a tobacco plantation in Virginia, I think. His mother was sold off when he was quite young, and so he has lived his life between the street where the other slaves live and serving up at the big house where the slave owners live. As a young man, an accident where he nearly drowns unlocks this magical power within him, and he finds himself joining the Underground Railroad, which is the secret network of people who are working to free slaves and move them into the north where slavery is not legal. His work with the railroad takes him to the north, but the pull of his adoptive family back on the plantation is too strong for him to resist. I thought this book was spellbinding, both in terms of the writing and the plot. I felt there was like enough balance between the lyrical descriptions, but also the action of the slave rescues to really kind of keep me interested, captivate me, and drive the story forward. I really like the female characters in this book. I thought they were all individually realized and they had their own experiences and story arcs, and I enjoyed the main character of Hiram as well. I felt that he was flawed enough to seem realistic. And obviously, although this is a historical fiction, the time and the situations in which it is set still play such a heavy role in society today. And this was, for me anyway, a really informative read. The treatment of Black people as commodities without their own lives or rights or feelings or hopes, dreams and wants was just, this is not an easy read. The people were stripped of their basic human qualities in order for other people to profit off of them. But in this story, Coates doesn't use violence gratuitously. I think he really drives home the differences and the comparisons between the quality, as in the slave owners, and the tasked, the slaves, to really hammer that point home, and also the contrast between the North and the South as well. I think this is a really intelligently written book. And it's a beautiful ode to those people who were kept as slaves. I just love this one, and I definitely recommend it to anyone. And I know there's a lot of you who have interests in Black history and equality and social justice. This is a really good book. And my final 5-star read was Unsettled Ground by Claire Fuller. This comes out on the 25th of March. So I had first read Claire Fuller when I read Our Endless Numbered Days a good few years ago now, and I can't understand how it's taken me so long to pick her back up again. I think this is the problem with me, in that I am just so greedy for books. I'm such a book magpie that I'm always just picking everywhere, and I never really take the time to focus and get lost in any one author's work. I'm starting to want to address that. I think I talked about wanting to do that with Sarah Moss in my last video, maybe. And I really think that Claire Fuller is another one of these authors that I want to spend more time with. So Unsettled Ground is the story of two 51-year-old twins, Jeannie and Julius, who have always lived with their mother Dot in quite a dilapidated, rundown, not a farmhouse, like a small holding. Jeannie was diagnosed with a heart condition at quite an early age, so her whole life has really been lived within the walls of the family home. And similarly, Julius has always been very loyal as part of the family, particularly after their father's death. And so when Dot dies suddenly, the twins find themselves quite lost without their mother. And a few different situations combine to make the walls of their existence start to crumble around them. And from that rubble, their mum's secrets start to come out. And I love a family secrets story. But this is also a story about abject poverty, social isolation, and family bonds being tested. Sorry, my finger clicked there. Oh, they clicked again. Sorry. Very attractive. What was I saying? What was I saying? Yeah, it kind of looks at what does it mean to be an outcast, even as an outcast from your own story. And I will say this is a bleak book, but it's also really powerful, and particularly the character of Jeannie. Life just kept throwing punch after punch at her, and my heart was with her. But I was also quite in awe of her because even though her resources are so scant, she manages to keep pulling herself through. It broke my heart because every time it looked like she'd hit rock bottom, she found out that actually there was further to fall. I just thought she was such a well-rounded character, and she's not the only one. I think Fuller's really good at creating fully realised characters, even if they're only in the story for a couple of pages. And what she's also really good at, because I noticed this in our Endless Numbers days, is that she can build and build and build the tension in a story to the point that, like, when it hit its height, I was like sitting bolt upright in my chair, like, oh my god, what's gonna happen next? And I love an author that can do that to me, and I think that's where the power of this book lies, is that there's too much tension to pull you through it, that you don't actually get lost in the bleakness of the story. And also there is some humor here, both in the way that some of the characters are drawn, but also from Jeannie herself and some of the observations that she makes of them. So particularly as the story goes on, this isn't an easy read, but it is a rewarding one. And I just think Claire Fuller is a fascinating writer. She takes these almost unique situations, makes them relatable, and just creates these really interesting stories out of them that you really are invested in. So I think she's got at least 2 other books. One's called, is it Bitter Orange? If it's not, I'll write it on the screen. And the other one's called Swimming Lessons. So I definitely need to get a hold of those. And then we get on to the first of my 4-star reads for February. And this is My Phantoms by Gwendoline Riley. This actually comes out on the 1st of April, but I couldn't wait to get to it because I've read a few of Gwendoline Riley's books in the past, quite a long time ago, and I've always meant to get back to her, much like I was saying the problem with my magpie approach to books. I think it was kind of like in the mid-2000s that I read those books of hers, and at the time I remember thinking that she really captured that feeling of our generation at that point in time, that kind of listlessness, lacking in direction, and feeling disappointed that adulthood wasn't quite what we had been promised when we were kids. And reading this book, now that we've both, gone through early adulthood and we've come into maturity, I still think she has that quality of being able to capture what our generation is thinking at this point in time. This is the story of Bridget and Helen, who are a mother and daughter, and their fraught relationship. Helen, or Hen, is a lonely, twice divorced woman who seems to want connection with other people, but is actually quite difficult and hard to get close to. And her daughter, Bridget, keeps her at arm's length. They only really see each other once a year. And kind of as a way to not justify, because she isn't trying to justify it, but in examining it to herself, Bridget looks at the impact of her childhood, moments from her mother's past, the divorce between Bridget's mother and her father, and the strange visitations that Bridget and her sister had with her father following that, her mother's attempts to find love and her disastrous second marriage. To reflect on these and examine their contribution to why their relationship is the way that it is. Her mother becomes ill and the dynamic of their relationship changes again. And we watch it as it's being forced into this new shape. Much like the other books by Gwendoline Riley that I've read, This book is more of a character study. It's quite introspective, with a narrator who is as flawed as she is relatable, because I feel Bridget can either be scrutinised or empathised with. She is a woman who is trying to put some distance between her and painful parts of her childhood, her mother's erratic behaviour, and the difficult view of the world that she has as well. I felt that Bridget was quite cold and unkind, a lot of the thoughts that she has about her mother, and it made me question whether, because we're only getting Bridget's view, so it made me question whether their fraught relationship really was all on the side of her mother, and that Bridget hadn't contributed to that in some way. I didn't know if it was a self-preservation thing or it was some sort of cruel detachment that made Bridget view her mother and their relationship in the way that she did. And it's kept me thinking for long after I finished the book about how we perceive our own relationships in life. And I just thought it was really interesting, and I almost, I wanted more than what the book gave me. That's not necessarily a criticism. I would have liked to have seen more, like, from her mother's point of view, and I just wanted more, because this is a really interesting book that's made me definitely want to dive back into the other books that Riley's published in the intervening years since I read her last. There seems to be a theme going on with this video, but yeah, I mean, this isn't a plotty paced book, but it gave me a lot to think about. My next 4-star read is out on the 11th of March, and this is How Beautiful We Were by Imbolo Mbue. This is set in a fictional African country which is under a dictatorship, and particularly a fictional village within that country where the population and the land is suffering by its proximity to an oil mining drilling plant. And I've been really enjoying African fiction in the past couple of years, and this one, with its environmental issues focus and the damage that big multinational corporations can do to the little people, it's something that I've not read from that perspective before, so I was really interested to pick this book up. So this story opens in the 1980s, so the oil plant has been there for a lot longer than that, but where we find the village in the 1980s is where the impact of that site is really starting to be felt by the village. They have crops that are failing, they've had oil spills, their river is totally polluted by toxic waste, children are dying, and this is likely because the water supply to the village has been poisoned. And at this time, representatives from the company come to the village and just give people, empty promises, false reassurances that, oh no, it's got nothing to do with the oil, blah, blah, blah. And nothing is changing. And we follow this village, particularly the story of one family, and again, specifically the daughter of that family, Thula, and also the whole generation who were children when the story started. We follow them through the next few decades as they start to fight for their lives, but for their right to health, for their land, for their heritage, and for their dignity. This book took me from where I was reading on the sofa right into the heart of this very vibrant village. The people are tied closely by their love for their village, their love for their ancestors, and there is a real sense of community. And so it's devastating to see the impact of a corrupt government and this big American oil firm just destroying their lives and their land. And although this is a fictional setting and a fictional story, I couldn't get rid of the thought in my head the whole time I was reading this that, but they may be fictional, but the scenario isn't. This does happen across the world. I kind of felt myself despairing at the smallness of the people from the village, particularly Thula, as she tries to lead them in this fight, and those of her generation who join her. And as I followed them throughout the years, it was really hard to feel any optimism when you saw just what was stacked against them. And I think that's because Every character in this book just felt very real. Even the children, which are kind of, is this a term, like an ensemble narrator? So it's all we did this, we did that. And I just really felt for them and anyone else in the world who's fighting a similar fight. Having said that, this book is an exhausting read. It follows a long time span. It goes into a lot of detail. And there are some truly sad and traumatic events in this book as well. I really loved the character of Thula, and I particularly loved that it was a woman who was the figurehead of this fight. But in a way, it also made me even more sad because of all the sacrifices and things that she had lost in the process. So yeah, this is not a light or entertaining read, but I think it's a really important one, and it is a good, rich book to spend your time with. And now onto that book that I wasn't sure what star rating to give it. And so for some context, all of these books are titles I received as NetGalleys from the publishers. So NetGalleys are typically advanced reader copies or ARCs, which can often be proofs. So they are not the final polished version you would buy in a shop. They are sometimes uncorrected. They're not formatted sometimes, things like that. A lot of them you wouldn't know that they weren't the finished product because I think they're sent out when they pretty much are finished. But others, not so much. And this particular book was a very unfinished arc. Normally, the fact that a book is an arc doesn't play anything into my review. I review the book for the strength of its writing, the characterization, the plot, the story, all of that. In this case, the arc was such unfinished quality that it has influenced my review, because at times lines were missing, words were missing, parts of words were missing. Some of the sections seemed jumbled out of order. It was really difficult to read. And I don't think it was a reflection of the author or what the finished book will be like. And I think it's testament to how much I wanted to read this that I struggled through with it despite all of that. But I'm saying this because I think my review will not reflect how good the finished book will be. And I guess in that, I'm kind of saying that this book is probably better than I think it is. So the book is The Soul of a Woman by Isabelle Allende. I really wanted to read this. So I read The House of the Spirits last year. I really loved it. I thought it was phenomenal. And so when I saw that this book was up for request, I jumped at the chance. Because not only is it by an author that I really like, it's a memoir about the experience of being a woman. And it feels like a cozy chat over coffee with a really admirable woman imparting the wisdom of her years. So in this, we learn about her childhood, growing up with a mother who was abandoned, left to raise her children alone, from her grandfather, who, although very loving, was very much a patriarch. She talks about the roots of her feminism and how they've brought her to this place where she now heads like a charitable organization in memory of her daughter who died aged 29. She talks about her experiences of relationships and friendships, feminism, beauty, fashion, expectations on women. There's so much in this book. Some really invaluable insights, lots of warmth, lots of wit, and just some really intelligent thoughts on society and women. And I don't think you need to have read any of her work before to appreciate this book. I mean, I've only read one of her books so far, and I still really enjoyed this. I think she's got a voice really worth listening to. So I'm frustrated that the copy I had of this was as poor as it was, but I think it really says a lot. I can still gush about this book, despite the fact that I was reading what felt like someone had dropped all the pages and some of the words had jumped off, and then they just kind of shuffled them back together and handed it out. This came out on the 1st of March. I'll definitely be looking to pick up my own copy of it so that one day I can actually read it how it's meant to be read. Also out this month is the paperback version of Saint X by Alexis Schaitken. This is one of my favourite reads from 2020, and so I'm not going to review it in this video. I will link above and below the video where I have reviewed it, but I would definitely love to give that book a shout out in a list of books that I think you need to read, because that is mwah, lovely. So those are some new or newish books that I would definitely recommend you check out. Did you like the sound of any of them? Do you think you'll pick them up? I would love to hear your thoughts, so drop me a comment in the discussion box below, and look out on Wednesday where I'll be putting up a little bonus video where I wrap up the other books that I read in February as well. Normally I will do my new releases as the bonus video on a Wednesday, but I picked a really strong set of new releases for February, so I just wanted to get out there and share them as soon as I could. So until Wednesday, bye.